Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the Daily Stand-Up. Without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to switch things up a little bit here. Today we're going to talk about a two-part series on team member empowerment. And on team empowerment, today we're going to cover part 1, and tomorrow we're going to cover part 2. We'll see how that goes, and we'll take it from there. For part 1, I wanted to talk to you about one of the things that I see as a failure point often when I go in and visit organizations. It feels like teams have often made mistakes in the past. We're only human. We've all made mistakes. But sometimes when we go into organizations, we find that the teams are often come down upon for the mistakes that they make, but they're never lifted up for the things that they do well. And once they've been torn down, it's pretty difficult to get the team to re-engage and to get them to feel like they're in an environment of psychological safety and to get them to feel that they can make critical decisions or that they can say key things or that their input matters. And I think that part of this has to do with the system by which we reward them. It's kind of funny because the reward system and the, punishment system tend to impact each other if they're not implicitly used correctly. So please allow me to explain. In many organizations, I find that people are rewarded for doing ridiculous things. One example that I have is I was in an organization who will remain unnamed, and I had an opportunity to attend the end of an all-hands meeting where they were issuing some awards for the team members who went above and beyond, who did extra things and really did things to help their organization be successful. And I'll never forget the day they said, our next award goes to this person who, put in the extra time from their hospital bed to make sure the project was delivered on time. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wow, that company just rewarded someone for being possibly on their deathbed and still worried about focusing on the project instead of focusing on the things that might be most critical to them, like family and getting well. It just struck me as awkward, maybe the same as rewarding someone, oh, you were in a terrible car accident, but you got your project in on time, amazing job. And it shook me the wrong way. I looked at the things that people were rewarding. I had one supervisor I remember in a place where I was coaching who came in. I just started coaching there. And he came in and said, why can't everyone be more like Michael? Michael put in 31 hours of overtime last week. Not that he was getting paid anything different for putting in, those hours, but he worked 31 hours more than everyone else did. And this was being rewarded like an accolade instead of punished like, man, dude, why did it take you so long? In my world of coaching, I would have looked at this individual and said, what made you feel like it was necessary to put in 31 additional hours above what everyone else did? Why didn't you value that time? What could we have done to work smarter instead of harder? And, was it too much work on your plate? Was it something you're not familiar with? I would have used root cause analysis to try to break it down and get to the cause of the problem. And I think, I discovered the answer when I was at home watching a movie of all places. Let me explain. So I was watching the movie The Amazing SpiderMan. Sorry, I don't mean for this to be a spoiler for anyone. But the SpiderMan mentality is what I want to talk about today. So when Peter Parker discovered he had his Spidey power, surprise, and he was living with his aunt and uncle at the time, and he discovered that they were running low on money to pay bills and that they were trying to make ends meet and just couldn't get things done. He entered a wrestling competition, an amateur wrestling competition, where the prize was enough for his family to be able to pay their bills. He successfully completed all the matches and ended up winning the tournament and went down to collect his purse from the guy who ran the amateur wrestling, venue, and only to discover that this guy wasn't exactly honest. He wasn't going to pay Spider-Man the entire purse. He was frustrated. He said, here's your little, money, go away. And Spider-Man was angry. Peter Parker was angry. And this is where he got his name, The Amazing Spider-Man, by the way. And he was so upset. And he decided, I'm going to turn my back. And when he turned his back to walk away, there was a gentleman who came down. Well, I shouldn't say a gentleman, a guy who came down to rob him. And the robber, held him at gunpoint and give me all your money. And Spider-Man had all the power in the world to stop that robber. But he chose not to. So the robber ends up robbing this guy, ends up getting away, and ends up carjacking a car that belonged to his uncle, and potentially harmed his uncle. We're not going to go there, but we're going to say, well, his uncle was on his deathbed, which he really didn't die, but that's for another story. Spider-Man's uncle offered him this sound piece of advice. He taught him, he said, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that sometimes we forget that, application when it comes to our children, when it comes to our homes, when it comes to Agile, when it comes to the workspace, that it's so important for us to empower and uplift people, to give them the ability to really feel like what they're doing makes a difference, to give them the ability to really understand and better embrace those things that make them unique or different, or those things that set them apart, and the things that uplift and help the team be successful. But it comes with some great responsibility. Now, what is the responsibility and what is the power? Let's talk about it. So the power comes from the opportunity to allow people to fail. We've all heard the expression, fail early, fail often, failure is okay. We learn from failure, we need to embrace failure. But yet, how many times do we hear that, but we don't necessarily embrace it, right? We need to empower teams to know that if they do research, if they do fail, if they do try and they're not 100% successful, that it's not the end of the world. That as long as it's not a matter of life or death, or a matter in which we had to use excruciatingly careful conditioning, failure is an option, and it's something that we can grow and learn from, and it's something that we will grow and learn from. You can tell your child 179,363 times that the stove is hot, but they won't discover that the stove is hot until they actually touch it. And I think that that's the power piece, right? We need to understand that, as an individual, we have agency. We have the ability to choose whether we want to touch the stove. We have the ability to choose whether we want to make a chance or a trial. But if we're constantly beaten down for taking that chance, it makes us unwilling to take the chance again. And the responsibility piece comes from, hey, now that I've given you this power, I want you to not abuse it. I want you to make good choices. I want you to leverage this power that I've given you to decide and make choices that are going to be for the benefit of all mankind. Had Spider-Man stopped the robber, would it have changed everything? Well, it certainly would have changed the complexion of the movie, and it would have showed that, beyond his human side, that he had this supernatural side that allowed him to discern that this was bad, and even though it may not have worked out in his best interest, that he still made the right decision. And I think that this all boils down to good decision making. So in summary, my challenge for you with this part of the podcast, with part 1, is to look at your teams and ask yourself, am I empowering them to use creativity and facilitation to do everything they can to make sure each increment of product or service that they build is potentially shippable? Am I helping break down the mentality that failure is a bad thing? Am I allowing them to live and work in an environment of psychological safety where they can use radical candor and speak openly about the things that are on their mind? Or am I constantly coming down on them for things that are happening? Now, while many of these things may seem like they're outside of your control, as a Scrum Master, one thing that is in your control is the environment. And I believe that if we set up an environment that's going to be conducive, it's going to allow the teams to really energize and to rally around a good cause and to do the things they need to do to be successful. Stay tuned tomorrow for part 2, where we talk about the second part of team empowerment, which is called the survivor mentality. That's the exciting part. But until then, I want to remind you to visit agiledad.com, like this podcast, leave us some comments, and as always, stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile. Until next time, take care.